Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of some adult fantasy books that are not Brandon Sanderson. I wanted to do this video for a couple of reasons. One, I know I talk about Sanderson a lot on my channel, and I try to also give as much recognition as I can to other books and series, and I recommend books even if I don't enjoy them, but I do have, if we had a scale here, the Sanderson stuff is, of course, the most. I have a lot. And then the other reason is that YouTubers who talk about books, so booktubers, that we often talk about Sanderson. He gets talked about so much, and while I love it and I basically never get tired of it, I know that there are a lot of you who are like, I know who he is. Can you mention some other books? I have a mix of some that are a little bit more popular and some that are not as popular, so that hopefully you can find something. And when I was sitting down to write some adult fantasy that wasn't Sanderson, the list is so long. So I could make this into basically 3 different videos, and I could even do some adult fantasy books that, even though I didn't love them, they are not Sanderson and you might love them. So I could ultimately do like 5 different videos for this if you'd like to see more. So if you would, just let me know in the comments down below and I'll happily make some other ones. Jumping into this set though, the first one I'm going to start out with would be Age of Assassins by R.J. Barker. Interestingly enough, I was intending on reading a different book by this author called The Bone Ships, and I didn't care for the writing style, so I ended up not continuing on with that one, but this one is completely different. So if you have tried that other one and you also, like me, thought it was maybe not your cup of tea, then I would still highly recommend this one. Check out both if you can, because I think that the author is a very good writer. But either way, this story at surface level seems like kind of your generic, typical, expected fantasy story. It's a coming-of-age story about a boy who is kind of like an apprentice to an assassin. They're being trained in the art of assassination, and they're currently on this mission to find another assassin. That's kind of the setup. So there's a lot of tropes there already that you can probably pick up on, but there's a few aspects that make this story very different. One, the relationship between the main character and his mentor figure. The mentor figure is actually a woman, and I find that a lot of times the mentor figure is a man, and then sometimes the main character is a girl, but I just feel like it's rare to have that dynamic where the mentor is a woman and the woman is the assassin and her apprentice is a boy. I just think that's already a different setup, and I loved their relationship. It's actually one of my favorite mentor relationships I've come across. And then on top of that, our main character actually has a physical disability, and I think that's another thing that we don't see all that often, and if we do, a lot of times it's kind of like a side character or something, but it's our main character, and I really just enjoyed that aspect of the story, to see this main character that probably typically wouldn't be the main focus of a story. And it is a little bit slower paced. If you're going into it expecting it to be high stakes, action packed, that kind of thing, and you think assassins, you're like, this is going to be awesome. It's a little bit slower moving than that. And like I said, it's basically a coming of age story, but I really liked it. I liked seeing the story unfold. It's kind of like a peaceful adult fantasy story in a bizarre way, which you might not think because of, assassins, but I quite liked it. Speaking of quite liking, the next one will be Ninth Reign. Have you heard me talk about Ninth Reign? It's really good. So if you're new to my channel, I really like this series a lot. And it's a trilogy. This first book, Ninth Reign, I think is one of the most bizarre books when it comes to its setup. It always sounds really strange when I try to describe it. So there is this elven-like race of people, and they, for a long time, have maintained what I would say is their almost immortality, because they can die, but they're essentially immortal, and they've maintained this by drinking the sap of this giant tree called Yggdrasil. And then the tree is essentially dying, and they no longer have that sap, and so they turned to human blood to try and maintain their near immortality. And this had a negative effect on the race of people. This thing called the Crimson Flux occurred, and it's this horrible sickness. So this race of people is now essentially dying out, which, despite the fact that humans are like, good riddance because you tried to eat us, basically, they're also kind of vital for the planet because of the fact that this race of people lived for so long, they kind of hold all of the secrets to history. And this is especially important because wars, there's these cycles of wars that always come from this unseen threat. They don't really, not unseen, but unknown threat. They don't know what this threat is. It's not currently there, and they know it's going to come eventually. And the only people that know how to handle this threat are the Aborans, these elven vampire-like beings. So there's only a few left, and now they've all basically died out, and we have one of the main characters is one of those people. We have somebody who's essentially an archaeologist type, and they're trying to get to the bottom of knowing and understanding these previous wars so they can prepare. And then there's another character who's a witch, and the witchcraft in the book is basically where they can take energy from other living things, and then they can create this witch fire with it. It is so good. It's unlike anything else I've ever read, and the end of the trilogy, I was so emotional. Oh my gosh. I love this series. Highly, highly recommend. I do have an entire dedicated trilogy review for it. And then also, if you want to see super in-depth spoilery thoughts, I'll have a video linked where I was invited to talk about this series with some other lovely people. Those first couple are definitely lesser known. I'm going to shout out probably one you've already heard, but I gotta give some attention to it. And that would be the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. So if you've tried Sanderson and maybe he's just not for you, or you've read all of his stuff and you're like, well, what now? And maybe you want to read more of the popular works, Joe Abercrombie has essentially become a staple in fantasy, and specifically the grimdark genre or subgenre of fantasy. So he writes characters that are not really very good people. In fact, they're pretty bad people, but he writes them in a way that's bizarrely entertaining. And sometimes you love these characters because you feel like, yeah, those are the kinds of thoughts I have. And then you're like, except for you're a really bad person, so what's that say about me? It's definitely very meandering. When you probably first pick this one up, you're gonna be thinking, where's the plot? And you're probably never really gonna find it. Even by the end of the trilogy, you're like, oh, okay. But either way, the character work in this series, everybody talks about it, everybody praises it, and I think you should probably find out for yourself if you like it. I was about to say everybody talks about Glokta, but honestly, everybody talks about all these characters. They're just so memorable, and sometimes you love to hate them, and sometimes you relate to them, and sometimes you're like, can you be just a little better? But also, it's highly entertaining. Sticking with more popular works, next up we have Vicious and its sequel, Vengeful. So currently this is a set of 2 books, so a duology, but there is a third one that will eventually be written. However, you can read this first one as a standalone. You can also read the next one and just treat them like a duology. They, within each of their own books, have their own stories, their own arcs. And something that is very especially creative, in my opinion, about this series is the way in which V.E. Schwab writes the story. So she writes it with a fractured timeline. You would think that would be very disorienting, and maybe it is when you first start, because it's not just going back and forth between past and present. It will take you from 7 years ago, 2 years ago, 15 minutes ago, and it kind of just jumps around all these different timelines. And part of why this is so fascinating is because you see our 2 main characters who hate each other in present day, and they're basically arch enemies. They kind of want to kill each other. And then you see in the past that they were best friends, and you don't know what happened, but you know that perhaps somebody gained some powers, or maybe multiple people gained some powers, and it's got kind of an X-Men vibe because the powers are all very unique. If you're somebody who is daunted by big epic fantasy, this takes place in our own world. It's very easy to follow as far as the amount of fantastical elements in it. A not so easy to follow book, but still one that I wanted to recommend, would be Mask of Mirrors. So this is the first book in a new series, and we follow this sort of Venetian-inspired setting where a con artist, who is a woman, wants to try and convince this one prestigious wealthy family that she is their long-lost relative. However, this family is kind of sort of on the brink of bankruptcy, which has made them especially suspicious of everyone, because kind of the way that you see in some stories, there's like noble houses that are up against each other and everybody's scheming all the time and they're trying to take over another house. It's kind of got that flair to it. So you have this group of people who are now suddenly very suspicious of everyone right when this con artist woman has come into the picture, which is making her con much more difficult. There's also some mysterious things going on within the city. There's multiple different magic systems that you sort of are starting to uncover, and the magic is very unique. And unlike a lot of other magic systems I've seen before, one magic system I've described in the past is kind of like fortune teller magic. And you have things with cards and readings and things like that. And there's also this masked, almost vigilante type character that's in the mix. And it is a multiple point of view story. So you are assuming one of the points of view is this masked character, but you're not sure who is the masked character, which adds just another fun aspect to it. It is not the easiest to get into, though, because there's a lot going on and there's a fair amount of perspectives. And on top of that, there are some very unique fantasy names in here. The last book I'll mention today is a standalone. One of my favorites. The more I think about this story, the more I really miss it and kind of want to read it again. And that would be Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. Similar to what I said about Age of Assassin, where if you tried the author's other work but didn't care for it, maybe give that one a try. I will say, I was not the biggest fan of Uprooted, which is often marketed alongside Spinning Silver, but I loved Spinning Silver. So that has been true for a lot of my friends as well. It's not just me. So if you've tried Uprooted and didn't care for it, still give this one a try. They're unrelated. So this is a fairy tale retelling, but it's rooted so much in European history. The author kind of pulls from her own heritage to try to represent this story in a very authentic way. We follow this girl whose family, they're moneylenders, and they also happen to be Jewish, and they're facing a lot of suspicions from other people, and it means that they are finding themselves, they're now facing poverty because they typically, their job requires them to lend out money and then eventually get that money back, but it's very difficult to go and collect money from people when they have all these built-up stereotypes about you. So the daughter of this family decides, I've had enough. I've had enough of people walking all over us. I am going to get us our money. She is kind of determined to provide for her family, and in doing what she does, where she's making interest, she attracts the attention of some fae, and that's where the magical aspects come in. And it's the kind of fae story that I know there's a lot of sexy fae nowadays in books. This is more your classic trickster, seasons are changing, the weather changes, strange things happen, like that kind of fae. It's more, that's a terrible way to describe it, but either, I think you know what I'm saying, that kind of older folklore type of fae. One thing I loved about all of these, a lot of them women in this story, is the quiet ways in which they find to be powerful, or the quiet ways that they find to be clever and sneaky, and have some form of agency in a society that doesn't always grant them that. I absolutely love the story. Also very, very atmospheric. A great book to pick up around the winter season. And it's a standalone, you know, so just one and done, which is always nice. That's it for some non-Sanderson adult fantasy books. Like I said, I have a huge list of books that I could talk about, so if you'd like to see more, just let me know. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.